Okay, I've got a few more days of great weather before it starts raining yet again. So I have again walked up to Fisherman's Wharf and decided to do my vlogging outside. So what I want to talk about today is low fat versus low carb dieting for fat loss. If you research this, and particularly if you look not just at people's opinions, but at the science, you'll find a lot of conflicting studies that give you conflicting answers. You'll find studies that say low fat is better. Not many, but a tiny number of them. You'll find more studies that say low carb is better. And then you'll find even more studies that say it doesn't matter, all that matters is the number of calories you eat. So, if you're familiar with me, you know what my answer is, which is low carb for fat loss, at least relatively low carb, relative to what you're usually eating. And I want to explain why I think that's the best approach, and why I think that even though the plurality of the scientific studies on this say it doesn't really matter either way. First off, I'll address the studies that actually say low fat is better. There are two things going on there. One is, in many cases, the diet that they had as the low carb diet in that study was not really that low carb, like 20 or 25% carbohydrates, so not really representative of what actual low carb dieting is. And also, in designing the low carb diets, often what they do is they just cut carbs and replace it entirely with fat, whereas low carb dieting typically means cutting carbs and replacing it with a mix of fat and protein. So their low carb diets were often too low on protein. And the other thing is just random chance, because you can always expect some studies to go against the consensus based on sheer random chance, particularly when you've got smaller sample sizes, shorter study times, a subject like weight loss where you have a lot of random variation coming from water weight. Oh man, hold on, there's a giant military cargo plane up there. It's kind of cool. And then just the way correlations are found in research is, they look for a 95% certainty that the correlation they're seeing is really there. That's called the p-value, and it's typically 95%, meaning that if they're doing everything right, there's still a 1 in 20% chance that the correlation they've seen is just an illusion caused by random chance. So that's what I think causes the small number of studies that say low fat is better. And then as far as the difference between studies that favor low carb versus the ones that say no difference, it doesn't matter, some of that's also random chance. But there's another thing going on, which is it depends on what variables they control for. And in general, the studies that say it makes no difference control for more variables, and they do everything they can to control how much activity people get and how many calories they eat. And when they do that, they see, well, it's just calories in versus calories out, which it is. I mean, ultimately, that is the most important factor by far. Leaving aside nutrient partitioning or the question of whether you are going to gain or lose fat versus muscle, yeah, calories in versus calories out does determine construction going on. Calorie balance does determine whether you gain or lose weight. The problem with that kind of study design is that a lot of the variables they're controlling for would not be controlled for in real life, and the controlled variables that are held constant are in some cases the very mechanism by which the independent variable, low carb versus low fat, exerts its effects on the dependent variable, which is how much weight people lose. What I mean by that is, suppose you have, two study groups, two groups of subjects, one of which eats a low carb breakfast and one of which eats a low fat breakfast, high carb. and both of those breakfasts have the same number of calories. Well, if that's the only thing you control and you let them exercise however much they want or eat whatever they want for the rest of the day, then the low carb group is going to do better. The low carb breakfast group is going to do better. But the reason they're going to do better is not because calories don't count. It's because A, they won't eat as many sweets throughout later in the day, because since they're not having sweets for breakfast, they're not developing the taste for it. B, they won't be as hungry throughout the day because their breakfast is more filling. C, that better breakfast is going to give them better energy levels throughout the day, which means both that they're going to get more lifestyle activity, more walking around, more non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and also be better able to make healthy choices, because just having more energy and being more woken up means you're going to have more willpower. And D, or E, whatever one I'm on, is they're probably going to, have more energy when they're at the gym and be able to work out a little better. And so, if you leave all of those factors free floating, then low carb starts to look better. If you control for all of that, then, of course, both groups are going to come out the same, because you've controlled for an intermediate variable by which the variable you're manipulating affects the variable you're measuring. It's kind of like if you wanted to study, does it make a difference if you live a block from the gym versus 10 miles from the gym, and you had those as your two groups. And you're probably thinking, yeah, of course it makes a difference. You'll go more often if it's nearby. But then if you control how often people actually go, you might reach the conclusion that, no, it doesn't matter how far away from the gym you live. And of course, we can see the problem with that. You've controlled the mechanism, basically. So if the studies that only control people's breakfasts tend to favor low carb, whereas the studies that control everything tend to favor nothing. They find a null result because they basically gimp the study. So, if you look at it that way, it does show that low carb dieting is better, but also that you don't have to force yourself to be low carb every meal to get the result from it. If you just systematize one meal a day and guarantee that that's going to be low carb, that alone is enough of a change to make a difference and help you lose weight. And if it's going to be just one meal a day that you say, all right, this one meal is always going to be low carb, breakfast is by far going to have the biggest impact, because when you nail breakfast, a lot of things later in the day, you just automatically do better. Your breakfast is going to affect your energy level and appetite throughout the day. It's going to affect your mood and willpower throughout the day. It's going to have a big effect on your neurotransmitter mix for that day, meaning, again, mood and willpower, but also overall alertness, mental ability. So just eat a healthy, if you want to lose fat, eat a healthy, low carb breakfast. And depending on your carb tolerance or personal preference, low carb is somewhat relative. This can mean no carbs at all, or it can mean a small number of low glycemic carbs, but in general, lower carbs than what's typical for you. And if you don't love low carb dieting or haven't done it before, don't force yourself to eat low carb all day every day. Just be consistent about having a low carb breakfast, and just monitor your results from that for a while and see how much of a difference that makes. Because if you're not already doing that, both all the studies that have looked at that and a wide number of people's individual experiences says that just fixing that breakfast and switching from the standard American breakfast to low carb makes a huge difference, and is maybe even the single biggest change you can make, other than cutting out sugared drinks, in terms of losing weight. So that's why I think the science actually does favor low carb, and that's why I think so many people find it effective.